So I have a special relationship with buttons. You could call it button love. Do you remember when you went to your grandmother's house when you were a kid and you discovered her button box? Maybe it was wood and it had a little spindle handle, or maybe it was an old cookie tin. And when you pried off the top and you looked inside, those buttons were like little gems. There were the translucent white ones that were mother of pearl. There were the fabric-covered ones that came from the dresses that maybe your grandmother had worn. And then there were the shiny gold ones that looked like they came from an army uniform. And maybe they did. Now, you felt so rich when you plunged your hands into that box and you let those buttons slip through your fingers. Maybe with your cousins or your brothers or sisters, you strung them and you made some necklaces. Or maybe you sorted them into piles and you used them as game pieces. Now, you didn't know it then, but you were a creative reuser. So people ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them I'm in the reuse business. And sometimes they sort of glaze over as I'm touting the benefits of reuse. You know, it's sustainable, it's environmental, it's creative. Because you see, I am a cheerleader for reuse. I believe that everyday materials like paper and fabric, and yes, buttons, can be refashioned, repurposed, and transformed. Do you remember Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara, when she tore down those curtains and she turned them into a dress? 19th century creative reuse. So you see, turning heads and changing attitudes about materials is what I do. Now, my dad was a great reuser, and I learned my love of materials from him. He was a terrific guy. And when I was a kid, he made me a Halloween costume one year. He took a big cardboard box, and with some spray paint and gold glitter and some old silverware, he transformed that box into a clock. Now, it was not the most comfortable costume because I could not sit down. However, it was the most original. And if you fast forward 30 years when I had kids, I too was making Halloween costumes. So one year it was the Discover card, and one year it was the bunch of broccoli, and also the Chiquita banana. No product placement. It was no surprise to anyone who knew me that after college, after graduating with a degree in arts education and stints in the film and the fashion business, that I wound up at a creative reuse center. But not just any creative reuse center. Materials for the Arts, New York City's premier creative reuse center, government funded, where everything is free to member organizations. Now, what's it look like? Well, think Costco and think Home Depot, and then shrink it down a little bit. We have a 35,000 square foot warehouse that is filled from floor to ceiling with all sorts of reusable materials that have been donated by businesses and individuals. Maybe you, or you. You up in the balcony, you're donating too, right? So what are people donating? Well, last week, actually, when Boardwalk Empire wrapped for their final season, they delivered a truckload of artificial flowers that had graced their sets over the last 5 years. The lilies, the roses, all the little potted plants. Event planners, really great at donating, because after all, what are you going to do with those 50 plastic lobsters that you used at last night's gala? Or the 5,000 baseballs that you had for that big fundraising event? You're going to donate it to Materials for the Arts. There's also architects. They donate foam core and tile samples, and clothing designers, fabric and zippers and buttons, of course, and thread. And then there's law firms and other businesses who have furniture, filing cabinets, chairs, and tables. And then everybody else is donating things that they don't need. So frames, plexiglass, wood, art books, and holiday ornaments. I cannot tell you how many artificial Christmas trees we get donated in January, and sometimes in July, and I can't figure that one out at all. So who's coming in? Well, for the first 20 years or so of Materials for the Arts' existence, because we are part of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, we were giving away things to nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. So it was the museums, the dance companies, the art galleries, and also the off and off Broadway theater companies. We were their lifeblood. But public school art teachers were clamoring to get in. And so in 1997, in an interagency agreement, the Department of Education decided to give some funding to Materials for the Arts to allow art teachers access. And a funny thing happened when we opened up the doors to the art teachers. They kept asking for the very traditional arts materials. Where's the tempera paints, the watercolors? And we said, well, you know, we don't always have those kinds of things, but we have these fantastic other things. And we realized then that we had to do some training because we had to show these teachers the transformative power of these materials, these non-traditional materials, so they could then use them in their classroom curriculum. So in 1998, with my colleague Joyce Suarez, we started to offer free workshops. And those workshops turned into a full-blown education center. And 16 years later, it is our work with thousands of teachers and their work, in turn, with hundreds of thousands of students in New York City that continues to inspire us to collect materials and redirect them from the landfill. We are proud to say that we are the largest provider of arts materials and all other materials to the New York City public schools. And now when teachers come to Materials for the Arts, they say, man, we feel like kids in a candy store. We love it here. Now, being a kid in a candy store aside, sometimes your first visit to Materials for the Arts can be a little overwhelming. It's big, there's a lot of great stuff to take, and you don't know what to do. So I always advise people who are coming into Materials for the Arts, come with a list, but come with an open mind. Because these materials, these non-traditional arts materials, are really screaming out to you, take me, no, take me. And you have to be open to their potential and the possibilities of using them. Now, this is Basil Twist. He is a puppeteer extraordinaire. And Basil knew just this because a number of years ago, he was preparing for a production that he was doing here called Symphonie Fantastique. And he came with a list, but he also came with an open mind. And it was the glitter, the shiny vinyl, the mirrors, and the feathers that informed his entire production. Now, you really don't see it in this picture, but believe me, if you look it up, you're going to see how transformative those materials were for Basil. So for Basil, coming to Materials for the Arts, it was the perfect storm of access, variety, and volume. And for me, it is this intersection of people and materials where the magic happens. Now, as a former art teacher, I know full well how important it is to provide all sorts of materials, but specifically non-traditional arts materials to our students. And I'll tell you why. The non-traditional arts materials don't come with instructions, and there's no pedigree. You can use them in any way you want. Now, students at PS 209 in Woodside, Queens, second grade students, were working on the citywide curriculum of urban, suburban, and rural communities. Now, normally, after studying the similarities and the differences of these communities, they would maybe make some drawings, maybe they'd make a diorama. But under the guidance of our artists in residence, Joyce Suarez and Lou Miranda, these students were able to create these unique mosaics out of CD cases, beads, faux jewels, and yes, of course, buttons. Now, they learned math because they laid a grid out on the original drawings and they divided them up in the size of the CDs. They learned to work independently because each one of them had a CD or two, and they could put their own sort of stamp on it. And then they learned the power of collaboration when all of the CDs were put together to create these beautiful murals. Now, in a day and age when everybody's working with a gadget, look, I have a gadget in my hand here, right? It was great that these students had the opportunity to get their fingers dirty with some glue and have a real tactile learning experience. Now, their teachers knew that they could never afford materials like this. And that is why I'm standing here before you and telling you how important it is to donate, because when students from Bushwick to the Upper West Side have the same access to a rich variety of materials, then we can talk about equity. Now, you may be saying right now, okay, well, what can I do? And I'm going to tell you right now, we don't want your reusable food containers, okay? You can either use them yourself or you can recycle them. But before, we did talk a little bit about how you were at some point a creative reuser, and now we're going to talk about how to become a creative donor. Now, there are a couple of reasons why I think it's so important to donate. Number one, when you donate, you free up space. And as we all know, space in New York City is really expensive. And we are paying for storage facilities. We're paying to put stuff that we're not using into storage facilities. So that's probably a whole other TED topic. Number two, so if you free up space, you've got some room, and that's really good for you. Number two is that if you decide to donate instead of dumping, then you're keeping really valuable materials from going into the landfill, and that's very good for the environment. Number three is that if you donate to a nonprofit or a place like Materials for the Arts, you can get a tax write-off, and that might be good for your bottom line. And number four, and maybe most important, is that you make connections with people in your community when you begin to donate. And so here's an example. You've gone paperless, good for you, but you've got a filing cabinet that you no longer need. So you decide that you're going to donate it. Maybe it goes to a local theater. Okay, they take the drawers out, they turn it on its side, they paint it, and they make it a boat for a prop for a production of The Tempest. Now, hopefully they've given you a ticket because you're an in-kind donor to them. You go and you see that production and you feel so excited that your no longer needed filing cabinet is now a prop in this play. It's got a second life. And maybe it's even going to have a third life when they take it out of the theater, put it back in the office, put the drawers back in, and use it as a filing cabinet. You are now connected to these people in ways that you never were before. You walk by that theater, maybe you become a season ticket holder, but you have made a connection to people in your community. Now, a number of years ago, I was introduced to the work of El Anatsui, a contemporary African artist. My husband was the editor on a documentary about him. Now, El is a master reuser. He takes everyday materials like labels and corks and bottle tops, and he weaves them into shimmering wall hangings resembling fabric. You can see them here. Now, El says that one of the most important things for him about working with these very ordinary materials is that these materials carry the DNA of the person who handled them, owned them, or used them before. I love that. It's such a beautiful thing. So when you decide to donate instead of dumping, you are passing on a part of yourself to the artist or the student or the teacher who's going to then put their own stamp on it. This is your DNA to their DNA. It's a life cycle of creativity. So now I'm going to ask you all to get your creative juices flowing. Underneath your seats are little baggies. Okay, they're going to look like this. So let me tell you about this. These are very typical materials that we get at Materials for the Arts. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at the materials. We've got about 3 minutes. That's all we have. Handle them. There's no right or wrong way to use these materials, okay? The choice is yours. We started this project when we had a lot of buckles donated a number of years ago. We had about 50,000 buckles. And so we started to put together the project. We call it Buckle Bugs. But it doesn't have to be a creature. It can be anything you want it to be. And if in the end you wind up with nothing but just having handled the materials, that's fine too. So we've got a little example up here of what you can do with a paper clip. I often use a paper clip in my hair sometimes when I need to pull my hair back. It's not very fashionable, but it works. So take a few minutes, just go with it, and please take these materials home with you. And I'm going to suggest to you that when you're on a tense phone call, or you're stressed out about something, take out the baggie and just play with the materials. You're going to find that they can relieve a lot of stress, and they're going to make you feel creative. And as I mentioned before, you're not going to feel like there's one right way to use these materials. So go for it. Okay, there's my butterfly. Okay, and we've got 1 minute left. I don't know, that went really fast. What kind of clock is that? Your teeth, you may have to use your teeth, but please don't send us the bill. Don't hurt yourself. Okay, there's mine. So I'm so sorry, but we only have 33 seconds left, and they're pretty tough on the time here. So I'm just going to share with you, here's what I hope the takeaway is. Besides taking the baggies home with you, and again, I hope that I've been able to impart to you some of my passion for materials, because I really do believe in their power and the transformation, the transformative power that they have. You are literally surrounded in your homes, in your offices, in your storage facilities with tons of materials that are just sitting there. Your choice is to pass them on. You can hand them off to someone else who can creatively reuse them. You can be the traffic cop, either the dump in the landfill or putting them in the hands of people who can use them. That choice is yours. The planet is calling. Please join the conversation. Thank you very much.